We usually assume our minds operate in neatly separated boxes. We think we have a highly structured logical engine for math, a spatial engine for navigating a new city, and a bizarre, chaotic engine reserved for our dreams. But the underlying architecture is identical across all three domains. Human consciousness operates as a unified topology of force, where solving a calculus problem and surviving a nightmare share the exact same structural framework. We can map this architecture by synthesizing two distinct models. Continuity theory provides the boundaries that make an experience feel cohesive, while the Brain Kinematics Model tracks the kinetic momentum and strain moving within those boundaries. By combining these two frameworks, the surface illusions of our daily experiences strip away. We can track the mechanical rules governing our minds and decode exactly how an abstract mathematical theorem relates to profound psychological trauma. Evolution is fiercely efficient. Our ancestors did not spontaneously develop novel, isolated neural hardware strictly to perform abstract mathematics. Instead, the brain relies entirely on repurposed spatial relational systems. We use the exact same hippocampal grid and place cells that early humans evolved to map physical territories and remember the locations of food sources. We use that ancient biological hardware to map abstract concepts. Balancing a complex logical equation requires the identical neurological mechanism as walking down a physical alleyway. When a student stares at a math problem and feels confused, they lack the correct semantic routing. They are quite literally mechanically lost inside a non-physical relational space. To observe how we navigate these internal spaces, we can apply the rules of physical physics directly to mental physics. This dual-column translation table maps the mechanical language of the physical world into the cognitive domain. First, physical energy maps directly to cognitive strain. This represents any deviation from absolute balance within your mental system. Physical momentum translates to neural flow. This dictates the exact speed and direction that cognitive change is occurring across your neural pathways. Finally, physical concentration becomes memory density. These are the deep structural attractors, the major memory basins that anchor your identity and relationships. This mechanical framework redefines the concept of feelings. They are not ethereal vibrations floating in your subconscious mind. Consider the difference between two intense states. High cognitive strain combined with fragmented, directionless flow produces anxiety. But that exact same amount of intense strain paired with a clear, directed flow produces motivation. The kinetic energy level is identical in both scenarios. Human emotions are simply the conscious dashboard readouts indicating your brain's real-time geometric trajectory. We can plot these specific cognitive trajectories. This three-dimensional phase space graph measures a person's precise mental state across three axes: coherence, strain intensity, and flow stability. When you sit at your desk successfully focusing on a complex task, you occupy Region 6. This area represents high coherence, controlled strain, and highly directed flow. If your workload suddenly quadruples, your position shifts violently into Region 7. Strain maximizes, coherence plummets, and flow fragments completely. We experience this region as cognitive overload or severe stress. Then there is Region 3. Here, coherence is only medium and flow is completely nonlinear, yet strain remains highly elevated. This is the exact coordinate mapping for REM sleep. Dreaming requires this massive amount of strain. Throughout the waking day, the brain accumulates unexpressed frustrations, unfinished conversations, and minor anxieties. REM sleep generates the kinetic energy necessary to process that specific emotional residue. Because the prefrontal cortex is mostly offline, the system lacks logical containment. Dreams are highly energetic kinetic environments, operating with fully exposed mental plumbing. To observe the raw flow of cognitive strain without waking interference, researchers analyzed a highly detailed dream case study. This stylized map illustrates the dreamer's internal global memory network. It divides into two distinct halves: a hazy, undefined north side and a structurally dense south side anchored by a massive mosque. These geographic directions dictate the emotional reality of the system. The northern sector represents distance, unfamiliarity, and cognitive uncertainty. The southern sector represents origin,
deep, stable attachment and parental anchors. The physical layout of this dream city acts as a precise geometric model of the person's internal relational landscape. The dream begins with a mundane logistical task. The dreamer receives complex, confusing street directions from a stranger regarding multiple crossings in the hazy north side of the city. The local routing fails. This single confusing interaction forces a severe working memory bottleneck, creating a massive local spike in cognitive strain. The mental system must obey a core mechanical rule. Kinetic energy generated by failed problem solving cannot disappear. It must flow somewhere else to find resolution. Because the logical pathways are blocked, the unreleased strain bleeds rapidly into the intermediate social layer. The dreamer abruptly abandons the street navigation entirely and attempts to fly above a gathering crowd. The elevation provides no relief. Instead of freedom, the dreamer immediately experiences a distinct, dirty feeling of social exposure and vulnerability. The initial logical failure mutated. The cognitive framework took the trapped navigational energy and instantly converted it into severe evaluative strain. The social maneuvering completely failed to stabilize the energy. With the strain still trapped, the surface-level problem-solving undergoes a total systemic collapse. The unresolved kinetic energy plunges violently downward through the neural hierarchy. It desperately seeks the oldest, deepest structural basins available to ground itself. The dreamer suddenly arrives at the high-level sacred attractor, the mosque on the deeply anchored south side, and discovers memory relics belonging to their father hanging on the walls. The system finally locates a release valve. A sad song plays over the speakers, and the dreamer begins weeping intensely, crying out loudly for their mother. This profound psychological grief acts entirely as a mechanical exhaust mechanism. The brain utilizes deep emotional centers to bleed off the logistical frustration of getting bad street directions. This exact architecture applies to waking life. Massive, unresolved anxieties about career or identity branch downward, reflecting perfectly in micro-level navigational failures, creating a continuous fractal structure. Researchers developed the dream-to-thought translation algorithm as a tool to decode this fractal geometry. By decomposing the scene, you can assign functional tags, map the underlying emotions, track the flow of strain, and translate the data into waking action. Apply this to the flying scene. The functional tag of flying above the crowd translates to ambition, but the direct mapped emotion tied to that action is discomfort and exposure. Translated to waking life, this precise geometry indicates a severe trap. The dreamer holds high-level ambition, but suffers intense ambiguity about pursuing it without alienating their own community. Bizarre, chaotic dream fragments serve as highly precise diagnostic readouts. They expose the specific waking stressors we actively ignore during the day. Achieving mental balance does not mean clearing your mind or eliminating activity. It requires actively coordinating your mental layers so that trapped strain can freely flow toward a stable attractor. Balancing an abstract math equation, crying for a parent, in a surreal dream use identical mechanics. They are both acts of relational spatial navigation. The human mind operates as a unified topology of force. Every thought, calculation, and emotion is simply momentum desperately searching for its grounding wire.